I'm delighted to be here. As you know, I'm the Executive Director of the CBA. And on Saturday is the start of our 16-day extravaganza, the Festival of Archaeology. This year's theme is archaeology and nature. So in many ways, quite a nice link through to the landscape as well, which sort of encompasses both archaeology and nature. I'm going to do two things in this short presentation. I'm just going to highlight what's going on in the festival, what it is and how we run it, and how you can get involved. And I'm then going to think about the role of landscape archaeology and storytelling and engaging the public, and sort of issue a bit of a challenge really about how you might reimagine the role of landscape discussions in the way we engage people and get them to think about the places in which we live and we work and we play as we get there, and then hopefully have a nice discussion of that at the end. Okay, so let's move on and whiz through these things. So what is the Festival of Archaeology? Well, it's now 35 years old. It started in 1991 as National Archaeology Days, and then successfully grown into a week for 16 days, a little hiatus in 2020 to go online, and then back in 2021 to what we now run as a hybrid event. So basically it's online and it is in person as well. So we try and do a complete blend around that now. Last year we had 479 events and over 1,000 individual sessions and activities going on around the UK. The festival is best described as a crowdsourced festival. Whilst the CBA does do some direct delivery, most of the events are put on by third parties, organisations, individuals from around the country who get involved, groups, societies. They can be national partners, so people like Forestry England, Natural England, or commercial units or university archaeology departments. What does the CBA do? Well, we primarily are the central events listing. So again, on our website, we list all the events, we promote all the events, we do online and in-person delivery. And then for organisers, we do a lot of support, advice and guidance. Some of the advice we might give might be around safeguarding and helping people make sure they've got the right safeguarding policies, help them understand what insurance implications are. We'll do the event promotion. We also then run an evaluation program around the festival. And this year we actually set up an advisory group to actually help us think about how we can do things differently and to do things better. So on the communications and engagement, we have a designated festival newsletter. We promote via British Archaeology magazine and BBC History magazine. We have multiple activities going on via our social media channels, including paid adverts on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. We use those really specifically to try and promote more regional activity, so to actually drive people to what's going on in their local areas, which is really important. And then we try and get as many partners and supporters to do promotion as well. Part of the festival is actually year-round, so we also have a resources page on the festival website, so that actually people can access activities and videos, films, presentations all year round. So again, we try and break out of this idea that it's just 2 weeks during the Festival of Archaeology. So again, lots of resources and stuff there that people can go in and look at and actually continue to engage in. So what we got on this year? Well, a packed programme. It starts on Saturday with the festival launch at the National Arboretum in Westonbirt. That's with Forestry England. Key dates then, 21st of July is Theme Day. So that is all about exploring the theme archaeology and nature. 22nd of July, we have one of our two This is Archaeology lectures. So that's AI mapping of historic landscapes for nature recovery with Iris Kramer. 24th of July, backed by popular demand, Ask an Archaeologist Day. So your chance to help people answer their questions about archaeology. weekend, 25th of July is Youth Activity Day at Tynemouth Priory, and hopefully we're going to be doing a creative online workshop on the 26th as well. 28th, we'll be announcing the winners of the Marsh Community Archaeology Awards. 29th of July, next, this is archaeology lecture. So that's Nick Overton talking about archaeology and nature recovery. And then finally, we have our Youth Day, including the Early Careers Conference that's run in partnership with the Early Careers SIG at CIfA. So that's a full afternoon of talks and lectures around that. We're doing a couple of things that run throughout the festival. So Past in Our Hands, this is a reworking of a day in archaeology into a more digital format. And instead of just being a day, Past in Our Hands is going to run throughout the fortnight of the festival. And it will also allow us to bring into that Ask an Archaeologist stage. So we're moving to actually run these activities on multiple platforms, as opposed to the traditional way we used to do Ask an Archaeologist Day, which was just on Twitter X. So we're just broadening that out for a whole host of reasons. And then we have a competition, which is a haiku competition this year. So go online, get your haikus in, and engage with that. So there's plenty of activities that we do directly, but you can actually get involved in. And if you do go onto the festival website, and we're going to pop a link in the chat for you, it's map-based, so you can find out what's actually going on in your area, what your nearest event or activity is, and do go along and take part, which would be brilliant. So in essence, that's the Festival of Archaeology. 16 days of utter mayhem for us as a staff team. I'm traveling around most of the country for the next 2 weeks, and I'll be posting my journey on Instagram and LinkedIn, so you can follow me there. But what I really want you to think about is actually how does landscape fit in to the Festival of Archaeology, and how does our work exploring landscapes actually work, particularly with that wider public conversation in mind. So really, it's about this question: archaeology, who is it good for, and what does that actually mean, and how do we actually translate it? And here, as I've done previously, I did at the CIfA's conferences, I just want to reflect back on the trial and error report that we concluded last year, which was a public user needs survey for archaeology, and remind people about some of the headline issues that came out of that. Primarily, the dominant focus on the historic record and data first culture means that we as archaeologists are undervaluing ourselves and hiding our practice. So again, I think it's really clear now that we as humans and our processes aren't as visible to the wider public, and that is actually a real barrier to other people participating. We do have a challenge around our data. It's still siloed and dispersed, and often for non-experts really difficult to get into, and that leads to this continued view that archaeology is loaded with elitism and exclusion. How are we managing the narrative and the conversation, and how are we helping people participate in that? And then we do know that there is a real lack of understanding around audience selection and the tracking of that engagement and feedback and evaluation. So the report did actually sort of highlight that we assume we know who we're talking to. We assume that they like what we're actually doing, but we don't really often go and ask them. Trial and error also included quite a lot of work to try and reach non-traditional audiences, so those people who don't normally engage with us. And we did this in very different ways. We actually went to them. We used creative techniques such as collaging to actually have broader conversations around what archaeology is and what it might actually mean to them. Often, if you go into a conversation starting, do you like archaeology, people look at you perplexed. But if you start talking to them about other interests and where their values actually lie, you get a whole different sense of what people find important and meaningful. And again, what we were able to do is draw out some really important angles that we could actually focus on in our narratives. So again, the importance of keeping traditions alive, the fact that everyday life matters to people. It's about their own lived experience, and how do we engage in the conversation around that? So actually really center our narratives in the everyday and people. There are lots of conversations about doing the right thing. People are really passionate about fairness and heritage work, and being ensured that there's an opportunity for anyone's story to be told and engaged in. The value of hands-on experience. People want to get involved. They want to find ways where they can go and do something themselves and not just be passive receivers of content. So we need to be far more creative in how we actually see that. And then this important final point about making archaeology more open to all. This idea that actually, we should be starting from the point that anyone can get involved in archaeology, but a lot of people face barriers and they face difficulties and challenges. Well, how are we understanding those barriers and how are we addressing them to create more equitable opportunities for people to actually participate and engage? Now, what I want you to do is try and think about what this actually means in practice and just start reflecting on different things. In archaeology, we have been exceptionally good at making our data available. We have some brilliant platforms, whether they're historic environment records, the Archaeological Data Service, or places like Layers of London, the Heritage Gateway, or Know Your Place. These are really fantastic ways where we've made data available. But I have to say, I'm not entirely convinced that we've actually made this data accessible. We still use our language. We still have a dominance around authorized lists of data and needing to search that in the way that we want people to search for it. So it is very structured and very, very controlled. And actually, for people outside of the sector, this is often baffling and really quite hard to engage with deeper. And nowhere are we actually giving any signposts or any navigational aids or prompts into this material. Even when we try and throw it open to members of the public saying where they value places, we then record that in a very top-down sort of process. We seek that authorization argument in there. And to me, what this is actually doing is whilst it's data that's there and it's accessible, I don't actually often think it's always readily digestible by people, and they struggle to explore. So for us, I think there's a real need to start reimagining what this actually looks like. And again, reimagining it from the perspective of not us in the profession, but from the world outside of the profession and how people engage with the narratives and stories about where they actually live. And here I'm going to just come back to a couple of examples I've used in the past of my own working life and my own working experience, where actually the quality of my work was fundamentally enhanced and influenced by talking to local people and understanding places through the eyes of local people. And one example here is a site just outside Leeds. This is Barnbow First World War munitions factory. This was a site that lay hidden for nearly 100 years, and its story was really only known amongst local people. And those local people kept the story alive of Barnbow. And the reason why they kept us alive was in 1916, on the 5th of December, there was an explosion in one of the shell-filling huts, Hut 42, that killed 36 women. That was the single largest loss of life in the history of Leeds in one event. It was so catastrophic that the government hushed it up. It was never really talked about. And it wasn't until a local history group really started to tell this story, and the families of the women who were actually killed and worked at Barnbow really started pushing for their story to be told, that it got actually wider recognition. I came across it just by chance, by hearing a local news. There was some development then going on outside Leeds, and I got involved in actually the development conversation. And eventually in 2016, I was able to get this site scheduled. And one of the most moving experiences I had was when the two people in the bottom left-hand photograph who are standing next to each other, Bob and Jackie Lawrence, they actually took me into the woods at Barnbow. It's now completely overgrown. And they took me to the site of Hut 42, which is the photograph with the trees on the right-hand side. So literally you can go into this woodland and you can go to the site of this explosion in 1916. None of that would have been possible. None of that story, getting it scheduled, wouldn't have been possible without the local community wanting to tell stories about their place. And you can go into this landscape read it. So for me, this idea of actually understanding local significance, understanding local stories, narratives, and how we feed into them is really, really important. Another big piece of work I was involved with at Historic England was trying to work out what to do with all the scheduled monuments that were listed as being at risk on the Yorkshire Wolds, primarily from arable cultivation. So again, at the bottom, you have these images of Nunnery Hill. In 46 are upstanding earthworks, and by 2021, you're struggling even to see them as crop marks and as field marks anymore. So what do we do with these sites? Well, we know they're all being impacted by cultivation, but how do we stop it? Or how do we address it? Or how do we understand the landscape better? And one of the approaches I actually took was to say, well, we need to understand what people in this landscape value a little bit more, and how do we draw them into this conversation? So here's a lovely aerial photograph of the Yorkshire Wolds. Wonderfully, you can spot the Yorkshire Wolds from the air. So it is this banana shape part in the middle where you get a very different field pattern. And if you actually look to the west of that banana shape, you'll see there is a preponderance of darker splodges. They are trees. So there is absolutely a landscape conversation about where planting of trees goes on in this landscape. But the way we approached it differently is we chose five areas that we'd go and explore in more detail with the local community, and we went and did some workshops with them. And what was actually fascinating is what happened when we went to speak to them. So you'll be able to tell where we actually went just by looking at these word clouds. So basically, we went to Flamborough, we went to Garton, we went to Driffield, we went to Longsborough. And when we had conversations with them, what was absolutely fascinating is how much they all liked the place they actually lived in. So what you actually get is this real dominance about my village, my place, my settlement. You don't tend to get much more. And so when we put it all into a bigger picture, other narratives tend to just get lost because people were so interested in talking about their actual place and what that actually meant. This got us thinking about how we ask questions about meaning and significance and what that is. And where do we ask those questions? So we then chose a number of food festivals that actually happen around this area. And we went and asked questions at these ones. And what was fascinating is you got a real difference in the conversations and the values and the things that people were actually looking at. So here are the three places we actually went to. The one with history predominating in, that was the Driffield Agricultural Show. The Wolds and Hockney, that was the Beverley Food Festival, and then Warren Percy, that was the Malton Food Festival. So what was really interesting is these different values were coming out when you actually went to different places and asked different questions. And so the importance there is actually what questions are we asking when we go and engage with people. Again, when you put those all together, the value of the landscape, the value of the archaeology, and really fantastically, the importance of chips in this landscape really do start to come out. And again, you can start to explore why that actually is. So for me, the real importance is when we go into our landscapes, we've got to think about the questions we're asking. We've got to think about the questions in relation to the people we're actually talking about. I did an awful lot of work, particularly in the Wolds, at a landscape around the Birdsall estate. So the Birdsall estate includes Warren Percy, it includes Warren Street. As a state, they have over 50 scheduled monuments on their land. So how you manage this landscape is really important, because you could almost see it as proxy for the wider Yorkshire Wolds landscape. So I had over a number of years conversations with the estate managers and the owners of this landscape about how they perceive the landscape and what they do. And a whole series of really interesting things come out of this about how they relate to the land and what it actually means to them. So the first thing they actually showed me when they were on their site was, the first thing we did is we actually went out with the Historic England team at the time to actually start looking at this landscape. And I went to one of the best views in Yorkshire, which was standing on top of this barrow that looks out over the house. So just in the background, in the middle of the trees, you can actually see the house. And I started talking about why this barrow might have actually been located in this place. I had with me our landscape architect, Chris Myers, and he said, I think you're wrong, Neil. I don't think this really was a barrow. I think this was actually a Georgian viewing platform for the designed landscape landscape that actually sits below you. Has created an amazing conversation amongst us all that actually we ended up saying it may well have started life as a barrow, but actually is this also a viewing platform, which was a conversation about how you start to perceive the landscape differently and how you start to perceive people who live in this landscape and what the owners were trying to do at different periods of time during this landscape. And one of the things when I was with the owners, they actually took me to was this little farmstead here, which was really fascinating. It's actually on the site of a medieval mill. The mill was in operation until the mid 19th century, and then in the 19th century they built a new farmstead right next to it. And for the Yorkshire Wolds, it was a very particular type of farmstead that was built around a central fold yard. Because the problem with chalk landscapes is they have a real issue around where there's water, and they have a real issue around the nutrients in the soil. You've got to put a lot of nutrients in to get productivity out. So in the Yorkshire Wolds, what they did is they went into industrial scale cow production in order to create cow poo to fertilize the fields. And this is a farm was a classic combination of a central fold yard where the cows would poo so they could collect it. But they weren't taking me there for that. What they actually really wanted to show me was the larger of the barns, this one here. Because in the 1950s, that's when the owner of the estate, Lord Middleton, actually introduced the current form of pig farming into this country. And the Middletons were really innovative farm managers and always thinking of things new. So again, you can start to tell a really interesting story about how we actually use our land. They then took me to this place here. This is Aldrow Farm, but what they wanted to show me was this area of the farm just to the north, where you get these really interesting mounds, just zooming in. I mean, these look like a very regular pattern of barrows that you find all over the Wolds. They're not. What they actually were a new form of cattle husbandry they were introducing, which was to allow cows to overwinter outside. So basically what happens is the cows all penned off. You have a set of pens for the female cows and a set of pens for the male cows. They don't mix terribly well on occasions. And what happens is this mound is a mound of limestone. And when the cows are on it and they poo and they pee, the mound gets higher and deeper, and the poo and the pee effectively operates like a radiator. It keeps them warm in winter, okay? And the mounds are there so that the pee drains to the side, the poo stays in place, and you basically get the cows self-radiating themselves during winter. A really interesting way of actually perceiving how we might actually use the land. And for me, what I absolutely loved is right next door to this set of cow husbandry, you get one of the best examples of a bowl barrow on the Yorkshire Wolds. And it just made me ask a really crazy, stupid question. Were actually bowl barrows ways of doing animal husbandry in the past, about thinking about water and cattle and the importance of cattle in this landscape? Now, I know that's really fanciful. That's really jumping, major steps ahead. But what's really interesting here is how we use the landscape today is fundamentally linked to how the landscape we might perceive the landscape being used in the past. And there was another site that they actually took me to, which led to a story about a snowplow. And this was a farm right in the middle of the estate that they took me to. This is just zooming into where that farm was. Again, another absolutely classic Wolds farm built around a central fold yard. What was interesting here, the tenant had just moved out. So the tenant worked on the estate, but they just moved out. He, his wife, and his 3 children, and they moved into the town of Driffield, which was 16 miles away. And the reason why they did that is they couldn't cope with some of the issues of living in this site. So the wife and the 3 children all had to go to Driffield every day to school and work, where the husband actually stayed on site to actually work the land. Okay, what they realized that this was completely the wrong way around of doing it. So they gave up their tenancy on this farm building. They moved into Driffield, and the father came back here to work. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, the really interesting thing is they took all of their personal possessions along with them, except for one thing. And the one thing they left behind was the snowplow. Okay, And why I like this is a real illustration of actually, this is the Yorkshire Wolds. We're 20 miles from York, but this is a very difficult landscape to live in. It has really harsh conditions during the winter. There are really major issues about lack of water at times of the year. So again, the story of this family actually helps us understand the effort you need to put in to manage this landscape. And is that why we have so many barrows? Is that why we understand how this landscape was actually divided and how people were actually living it? So again, this is this importance of being able to reference our conversations in the present and who we're actually looking at. And this resonates a lot with me. In 2022, I walked the entire length of Hadrian's Wall over 9 days. And in essence, what I was doing is I was following the guidebook of Jessie Mothersole. She wrote a book about Hadrian's Wall in 1922. So this was the 100th anniversary. And I was doing some work, effectively thinking with Dr. Amara Thornton from Beyond Notables, who'd been investigating all these amazing early female archaeologists. And she came across Jessie's book. And what was amazing about Jessie is she didn't just write a guidebook, she actually did all the illustrations herself. And so over my 9 days, I wanted to go and see if I could re-find where she'd taken all her pictures and if we could actually look at them and recreate them. And by and large, we were really, really successful. Everywhere she painted, I was able to find the exact place and almost the replica images to actually take of those. But what was also really extraordinary in this process is Jessie used her paintings to sell the book. But we didn't know where any of the original paintings were. And so we actually did a call out whilst we were doing the walk, and we did find one of the original paintings. So this is the original painting here that is now owned by somebody who lives near Hadrian's Wall. But again, it's this really interesting thing that what Jessie was bringing to this conversation was the mindset of not just an archaeologist, but the mindset of an artist. Okay. The other thing I actually found fascinating when walking along the wall is this idea that it is completely enmeshed in its environment and vice versa, and they sort of influence each other, and they start to get you to really engage different ways. This is Wall End, where the wall has effectively become just a droveway. You get this amazing tree-lined avenues and these amazing trees growing up around the wall, almost exhibiting the deep time of the wall. But right next to that, you get this amazing place where Hadrian's Wall is three things. It's a wall, it's a hedge, and it's a fence. So it's this idea that you get these amazing resonant stories coming down. So it's not always a big, huge built wall, but it actually lives in its landscape through the ways that we've perceived it as a boundary. You also get this incredible resonance about how we commemorate people and people's lives in this conversation. So in the middle there, you have a Roman altar stone, classically commemorating somebody who might have died along Hadrian's Wall. On the left-hand side, you get a memorial to two brothers who died in the First World War. So again, almost this resonance of military service and then campaigning and then death and is there. And then one of my favorite things we actually find a lot on Hadrian's Wall and on national trails is footpaths repaired by huge flagstones. Well, these flagstones are actually come from former mill sites in Lancashire and in Yorkshire where the mill's been destroyed, but their flagstone floors are repurposed to create the footpaths we walk on. I think there's this incredible resonance story about the thousands, the tens of thousands of people who would have stood at a loom working, never having the opportunity to get out into the countryside, yet now the very place that they were standing has been transported into the countryside, and we're walking across it without even realizing the traces of people's past lives that we're actually walking on. So again, these stories are there throughout the landscape. How do we bring them to life? It's really interesting when you start thinking about how people do this in literature and how they start writing about these places. And often I wonder whether we shouldn't be thinking about ourselves as some of these storytellers in this way, using the places we engage with as the tapestry upon which we can build really interesting narratives that actually come into the conversations. And again, when I was walking the wall, I was getting recommendations of what to read and what to actually think about when doing that journey. Not everybody liked what Jessie actually had to write when she in her book. The Antiquities Journal said this is a gossipy guide to a monument that the author approaches with the greatest reverence and reproduces in colour with pleasing effect. The book will have many uses for those who emulate the author's energy and make the pilgrimage on foot. The thing I found about Jessie's work is not only did she do the painting, but her paintings have become the iconic images of Hadrian's Wall that we actually see today. These are the ones that are presented to us. So again, you can see this, I think this is near Nab Scar, where Jessie's picture, this is the photograph I took, but this Get Involved was one of the images that was used to celebrate Hadrian's Wall 1900. So that sort of iconic nature of the views along Hadrian's Wall, I believe you can trace back to Jessie. So if we wrote in the style of Jessie, we could be creating the iconic stories in the future. Hadrian's Wall, though, has huge resonance elsewhere, and often these are the stories that are locked away and we don't see. So there's a barn just to the west of Carlisle that actually has this huge crack in it, and the reason why it has a crack in it is it sits over the top of the vallum. And so the archaeology is making this barn fall down. All of these other images to the middle and to the right, this is Hadrian's Wall through Newcastle. This is going along the Westway. And actually what you find are these incredible resonances of references to the wall. There's this top crenellation here. This is on top of a semi-detached garage. All of the garages had these crenellations on it. Lo and behold, somebody knew there was a Roman wall there at some point. Here you have Biker Grove or Biker Wall, and you know, this uncanny design, and it looks like a Roman fort. You know, is someone thinking about that? You have an incredibly Romanesque church, and again, this house here that has this Romanesque style to it, both sitting on one of the smaller forts as you go through Newcastle. And again, then you get these names, Rovan Avenue, Vellum Court. So this idea that you've got to go and find the actual stuff isn't right. There's resonance everywhere about how we perceive and look at it. And my approach here, I have to say, I think it's really been influenced by my own upbringing and my own background, and in particular my mother. My mother was a teacher. She was born in Ireland, and she did a very particular type of teacher training called Frobel, which was all about using the environment around you to go and be observant. And so my mother is the one who encouraged me to be curious, to be inquisitive, to get lost, to pick things out and actually ask questions about them. And again, I'm really interested about how we reframe our role, not as the people who give answers, but the people who frame questions. And thinking back about that journey, you know, I'm starting to realize just, you know, how deep time in my own family life starts to influence that. So this is a picture that was drawn by my great-grandfather, who was employed mapping Ireland for the Ordnance Survey. And this is a fictional map that he actually made up, Castle Vision in the barony of Nonest and the county of Fancy. And this makes me really think about that whole role of storytelling and thinking about landscape and how we record it and what it says and the powers of storytelling in this actual process. And then the two images there is actually an image of his father, his who was also worked for the Ordnance Survey for the mapping projects in Ireland in the middle of the 19th century. So again, this fascinating for me is, oh my gosh, there's some way of my own thinking about landscape that partly is deeply embedded in my own DNA and my own, you know, sort of ideas of spirit and soul and identity. Really, really important the way we actually think about that and not be shy about it. And indeed, I actually play this forward. This is my daughter, and she's now 21, and I've been really fortuitous to see her growing up and seeing how her own sense of geography has been shaped and influenced and how she starts valuing things. And again, I would really encourage us to understand none of us are born with understanding. We develop that, and what we experience is really important. So again, what is our role in actually making archaeology a more experiential activity that helps people shape the way they think about things? Indeed, at the CBA, we're trying to do this sort of stuff in practice now to get people to engage. So at events, we take around a big board, which has a huge map on it. And on that map, we want people to list their places of memory and meaning. So it might be something to do with archaeology, or it might be something to do completely differently, as a way of sort of capturing this idea of this storytelling and what it actually means. And I'll just give you one example about why that's really, really important, what it means. I was at an event last summer, the Chalk History Festival, where I was using a geophysical plot of Vale of Pickering, so one of Dominic Powson's huge landscape geophysics maps. And I was talking to somebody about everything we could see and we could spot, and could we guess what this was? Could we can think about that and how we lived in that landscape? I then asked the person if they would fill out our map of memory and meaning, and if they would mark a place that was really important to them on. And they marked this place near Edinburgh, Lammermuir Hills. Okay, and he said he put it on there because it's where he asked his wife to marry him. And he then turned around to me and said, "But I don't know why you'd be interested in that." At which point I took him back to Dominic Powson's geophysics map, and I said, the reason why I'm interested in that is it's the one story I will never find on this geophysics map. I don't know where people might have become betrothed or agreed to form a family or done those ritualistic moments in their life. So actually, the idea that our lived experience is important to deepen our narrative also can become rapidly invisible is a really important conversation. So we then had a whole conversation about reimagining Dominic's landscape through moments like asking somebody to marry them and what that actually meant. So it was a way of really personalizing that. And really, just to start finishing off, we're exploring how we do that with an online walking platform where we can actually go out into the landscape to film videos, short videos, embed them in a walk that people can do. And the best thing about this is people can actually go in and add their own comments to it and start reflecting back again. So what we're really looking at there is driving a different form of participatory activity that enables people to engage with the content that we've actually got or the thoughts and the ideas we've got. And really what I just want to reflect finally on there is some of the stuff going back to the trial and error report is this idea that really do we have to drive the concept of curiosity and connection more than we actually drive the concept of data and fact and recording. Actually, we need to make our landscapes come alive. I suppose that's my real challenge for you all. How are you going to do this? How are we going to start imagining archaeology as great literature like someone like Robert Macfarlane writes about place? We have so much to contribute to that. Yet ultimately, through our processes at the moment, we're making our voices very silent. And I think we should really be thinking about how do we make our landscapes come alive through different and more imaginative processes.